So I wish I could have come up with a fancier name, but alas, this was the best name I could come up for this evening's program because it really qualifies and describes what we're trying to do tonight. You can see it there on the screen: changes to educational, social, and religious programming in response to the results of the congregational survey, best practices from other shuls, and recommendations from Governor Raimondo. That's sort of the idea of this evening, is we wanted to update you as to sort of where we see the shul heading for the next couple of weeks, and then give us a chance to reevaluate as we move forward. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the values and the ideas that sort of help the clergy and the officers figure out what to do in a situation like this. Number one, I want to talk about leadership power dynamic, and that is the following idea. I don't believe that clergy or the president of the shul, sorry, Charles, anyone sets policy and everyone just does what they say. It's my hope, and the way that I've learned through my years of work in Lexington, Mass, and what I want to bring to the synagogue, is the sense that clergy and religious leadership has an idea of where the shul might want to go or ought to go, but that's always in dynamic conversation with the congregants themselves. In other words, if you wanted to lead, you have to make sure people want to go where you're going. But you also have to have a vision of where you'd like for them to go. So I really see the role in sending out the survey and the role in getting feedback. And what I've been telling people since I arrived is if you have feedback or suggestions, please be in touch directly with the clergy, is because it's a conversation and it's a dynamic. And it's helpful to know what's working, and it's helpful to know what areas can be strengthened and improved. Because unless you have conversations, real conversations like that, it's hard to make sure you're responding to the needs of the community and that the community knows where you're coming from. So that's the first piece of this. And why we sent out a survey was because we are trying to get feedback. I think we're all navigating these uncharted waters, and we want to try to make sure that we're helping as many people as we can in the process. Number two is a question about what does it mean to be part of the community, or what does it mean to be in community? It might come as we joke, right? 3 Jews, 4 opinions, or 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and you're all laughing because you know it to be true. But what's really challenging is when you're trying to create a community of Jews together, you have 760 some odd households, and they all have different opinions. They all have different needs, different desires, different passions, different interests. And part of being in a community is recognizing that you can't have everything exactly the way you want it. In other words, you will find a lot of stuff that overlaps, but we'll also find places where we disagree. And I think having conversations about what are the values that are informing those decisions, in addition to having conversations about the policy themselves, are an effective way to make decisions as an organization. Because a person might say, I don't like this particular point or policy. And then you say, yeah, but here are the values that I'm using to help make those decisions. And maybe if you can agree on values, then you can have a constructive conversation. There was a question that was once asked to Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the big halachic deciders of the Jewish community of the 20th century. Like, if you were a person who put rabbis on your wall, you'd have a picture of the Emanu-El clergy and maybe Moshe Feinstein. That's how big this guy was. And they asked him a question about, can doctors write on Shabbat if they're working in the hospital? And can doctors use the elevator on Shabbat? And they went back and forth. And ultimately he said, listen, if you have to commit everything to memory, or you have to, you're using ink that will disappear after a while, or maybe if instead of taking the elevator, by the time you get upstairs, if you take the stairs, you're going to be winded and unable to provide care, better you should use a pen, and better you should take the elevator. And when some people heard this, they said, oh, you're being so lenient, you're being so loose with regarding to how you're interpreting Jewish laws. They said, you're being really relaxed with regards to Shabbat. And he said, I'm not being relaxed with regards to Shabbat, I'm being strict with regards to saving a life. And so every conversation people have about Jewish law is, I think, a conversation about different values. And we will emphasize different parts of those values as making different decisions. And sometimes in life, we might want to give more credence to Shabbat. Sometimes we want to give more emphasis to pikuach nefesh, of saving a life. Sometimes we want to emphasize people's religious autonomy. And sometimes you want to emphasize communal standards. So anytime we're having a conversation, I think it's helpful to understand where are you on this spectrum of emphasizing different Jewish values. And that is, so here we go. We find ourselves right now in an unprecedented moment in the history of the world. Many of us have not lived through a pandemic. Many of us have never lived through a period of being on lockdown or being at a stay-at-home order for several weeks at a time. And so this is a different kind of situation. And within the construct of Rabbinic Judaism, within the construct of halakha, there is a concept known as shat hadachak, literally a time of pressure, a time of emergency, a time of duress, a time when we have difficulty. And the rabbis actually use this as a halachic tool throughout history. When there are situations when ideally you would function in position A, or you would have policy A, sometimes you can't do it. And so you are able to rely upon leniencies, or you have the opportunity to rely on minority opinions to allow you to give you some more halachic wiggle room. In other words, this is not a break from the halachic system, but it's actually built into the system. So as a way of resolving any problems that happen to come up, it's not used very often, but arguably we are in a situation like this right now, where it is unprecedented. We are all in a state of duress. We are living with difficulty. And so this opens up a new world of halachic opportunities available to us. To be clear, this shat hadachak is meant to be a time-bound thing, whereas once the reason for the emergency disappears, all of the leniencies you've employed also go with it, right? So we have these terms available to us as well. Okay, I want to share with you, when there is a shat hadachak, there are lots of different questions that arise as to how do you respond to it. And if you think about these first two slides, the leadership dynamic and what does it mean to be part of community, they get played out differently in different communities. This was a letter that was sent to a synagogue in Deerfield Beach to its members. I don't know how many of you saw this circulating online, but I will read it to you if you're listening over the phone. It says the following thing. This is from the Young Israel of Deerfield Beach. It says, "Dear members, it is with complete disgust and revulsion that we are forced to share with you that in spite of our own Mara Da'atra's clear halacha guidance," in other words, the rabbi gave a ruling, and people did what they wanted anyway, and those of the OU, Young Israel, Agudath Israel, RCA, and other rabbinic organizations, plus guidance from these doctors, there were a number of people who blatantly violated our shul's policy and participated in a rogue minyan this past Shabbat. This was an in-person minyan, not a virtual minyan. This was people gathering together. It says, this level of ra chutzpah and dangerous sofek pikuach nefesh, basically endangering one's soul or one's lives, cannot be tolerated. This type of behavior and the individuals who perpetrated it must be responded to with significant consequences. Those individuals who participated will be stripped of any current positions in our shul and denied any forms of kibudim, honors, including aliyot, reading from the Torah, being able to serve as a shliach tzibor, or teach in the synagogue. At a time when in the world in general and Klal Yisrael in particular are confronted with dramatic and tragic challenge, it is incumbent upon us to band together and unite behind our rabbinic and medical leadership. We truly hope this is the last time such a letter must be written, and that comes from Rabbi Yisrael Edelman and the people from the executive board. First off, I just want to pause for a moment, talk about differences of how communities operate. Could you imagine the shul sending a letter like this, right? A shul saying where if you disagree with the rabbi, you can't lead services. I rest assured you will not be getting a letter like that from this congregation or from this clergy team. But it is interesting to see how different synagogues have different modalities of how their rabbis lead, how the rabbis and cantors lead, how it is very much a top-down deciding things from above and hoping that it is put into practice. And I think you're hearing from the outset, and this is a theme you're going to hear throughout this evening, how much of this is a congregational conversation and how much of this is an attempt to figure out who we are as a community and how do we as congregants and clergy respond to this troubling time that we find ourselves in right now. So this has led to a lot of questions, and whenever there are lots of questions, you have lots of opinions. If you look at My Jewish Learning, one of the hottest topics is what do we do about minyan? And what do we do about the mourner's Kaddish? Here is an article written by Rabbi Eli Confer. Perhaps you've heard of him. Here you have an article that was featured in the Times of Israel article, Can Kaddish be said in a virtual minyan? And then here's another one that actually just came out today from Rabbi Golinkin, who is a rabbi of over at Schechter in Israel from the conservative movement. If there's no minyan, are there alternatives to the mourner's Kaddish? And so all of these articles are trying to find different rabbis who can answer these questions. And this, of course, leads to a great joke, which is in Israel, if you ever call the rabbanut, you call the rabbis and you say, with a question, it says, if you'd like a strict interpretation, dial 1. If you'd like a lenient interpretation, dial 2, right? You can find different rabbis who will answer questions in different ways because they're emphasizing different values or they're trying to focus on different parts of the tradition. So our congregation sent out a survey last week, and much to our surprise, our joy, we were happy to have thus far received 135 responses. And if you think 135, if you want a comparison, when we sent out our high holiday review, we received 40, right? So when we talk about wanting to get feedback and understand where the congregation is, people clearly have more opinions about this than they did about the high holidays, and you can do what you want about that. Of those people who participated, I'll share with you the first question was, are you engaged more, about the same, or less than you typically were 6 weeks ago? 40% of respondents, over 40%, responded they're actually more engaged. 30% of respondents said they're participating at the same rate, and 30% said they were participating less often. What's interesting thing, though, is if you break down that last category, the less often, of that 30%, 2/3 of it, people responded saying that they're not as involved because they're just tired. They're stressed out because of work or because of their adjusted schedule, or they don't find living in a virtual environment compelling or fulfilling, and that's why they're not engaged. But they appreciate what we're doing, and they like and they understand why other people like it. And the remaining 8 to 10% or so, we're looking for different things or are just dissatisfied with a virtual experience. So we sent out a survey and we asked lots of purposely open-ended questions. And I want to share with you these 2 comments that I present anonymously and somewhat cleaned up. They were a little stronger, but I think this is a nice way of presenting them. One person said, one of the respondents said, I have found the morning Zman Kodesh sessions to be a very helpful way to begin my day. They are convenient and, in my opinion, more engaging and meaningful than reciting the traditional liturgy. These online sessions make me feel connected to other people, and I walk away every morning having learned something or challenged to think about something. Racing through pages just to say we did it has no spiritual feel and promotes little connection between participants. And so that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, another person responded, while I appreciate the teachings that have been presented, and I thank the clergy for their time, preparation, and attempts to reach out with thought-provoking, relevant material, I would prefer to have our old minyan. I miss the prayers, and I miss the Kaddish. And so these are 2 examples of the many comments that we received. Overwhelmingly people, well, you'll see more of the data later. But this is the challenge. And I want to start out from this point because the issue that the conversation I'd like to have isn't what are we doing, period. But it's actually a conversation about recognizing, number 1, people have different interests in our congregation. And overwhelmingly, people have been responding both with their feet and also in the comments that we received in appreciation for what we've been doing, both the variety of programming and specifically with the Zman Kodesh sessions. So let's look at some of the data. Here are some of the takeaways we learned. Most people love the Zman Kodesh format. It allows people to interact with each other. It's a good time. It's about 20 to 30 minutes. It's a nice mixture of liturgy and learning. Every day is a little different. A great way to start the day. And like I mentioned, when compared to the numbers of people we were getting for in-person minyanim, it's significantly more. We also learned that people miss going to minyan. They miss hearing the Torah being read with regularity. They miss hearing some more of the traditional liturgy. Many people also commented that they just missed seeing their friends. They liked walking to minyan and getting a hello or a hug or a handshake or a fist bump or an elbow or something. They loved going and meeting new people. and they just missed that. Many people, it was a theme, miss reciting the Mourner's Kaddish, which we'll talk about later. Most people commented that they love this new interactive Kabbalat Shabbat format. We're averaging between, I would say, 60 and 80 households. And if you factor in 2 people roughly per household, that's 160 people joining us every Friday night for Kabbalat Shabbat services without offering a meal. Think about that. You always say if you feed them, they will come. We're not giving anybody any food, just food for the neshama. And people are coming and they're enjoying it and participating in it. And overall, we've had more engagement and participation in all of the offerings that we've offered. In terms of programming, some of the takeaways, people love and have enjoyed Cantor Mayer's liturgy class. They love Rabbi Confer's Parsha class. They like learning from Dr. Fine and Amy Cohen and Eitan Hirsch. They love Lunch with Bob. And they've also really enjoyed getting to meet the staff, knitting with Ronnie and Tat Shabbat and Simchat Tad and Shara's trivia nights on Sunday nights, the binge-worthy shows with Shosh. And in other words, the programs we put up there on the schedule, people come to them and they enjoy them and they like having the connections. Last night we had 86 people at our Emanu-El's Got Talent show, and you got to meet people and connect in different ways. People mentioned that they'd like to see more adult education opportunities, in specific, more opportunities to learn Hebrew and more opportunities to do Daf Yomi work. And there was also a question about, are there more things out there that the shul could be promoting? In other words, are there concerts or programs that we don't host that we could serve as a gateway for people? And then finally, there were a lot of questions people asked. Number one, people want to know when we can get together for Minyan in the building again. People want to know what we're doing about the high holidays and when they'll be able to see their friends again. And you could almost feel, right, that the survey was holding all of that anxiety, all of those things that we all want to know, that we might not have a technical answer. It might not even be a halachic answer, but it's a question people just want to know sort of what to expect. The uncertainty at this point is tiring, and people want answers, and they want to have a sense of confidence knowing what's happening moving forward. And then finally, it was overwhelming how just appreciative everyone has been. The compliments, not only to the entire staff, but to the whole Temple Emanu-El community has been something that was really beautiful to read. To see how congregants are reaching out to each other and connecting with each other was really nice. And all of those comments just saying thank you do go a long way. Okay, things we've already done and things in response, or just things that people should know about. Number one, in response to people connecting outside of email, we've created our TE Talks listserv that I think has around 60 congregants on it right now. And people post questions, where can I find Lysol wipes? Where can I get toilet paper? What's a good place to get vegetables? And people are responding. And what's even more beautiful is people are saying, someone says, I'm looking for Lysol wipes. And someone says, oh, they have them at East Side Market. I'll pick you up a box or two and I'll bring them to your house. And people are connecting and helping each other in a way that they weren't able to do so. And what's really nice is people are making connections on Zman Kodesh and then reaching out on TE Talks. So that's one way of working. If you'd like to get on that listserv, you can email Sharon Sock, sharon@teprob.org, and she'll put you up on the listserv. As a reminder, you can either get each email as it comes in or get a digest at the end of the day where it collates everybody's answers and things like that. Also, people said that sometimes they had trouble logging in. And so last Friday night, we actually set up an IT department. Paul Stauber made himself available. If you had any questions or needed any login information, you could just call him. And so that was based on the feedback and directly responding to it. It makes I can understand the frustration sometimes of wanting to log in and not being able to have the password, or there's a glitch or something like that. More often than not, it's a matter of people's Zooms need to get updated. You need to update the software or something along those lines. Because someone once said to me, I put in the password, I clicked on the link, and it didn't work. And I said, so what'd you do next? They said, well, I didn't work on my computer, so I went to my iPad. And what happened on the iPad? Oh, it worked flawlessly, right? So some of the IT issues happen on the user end, and some of it happened because we paste the wrong link or we're using the wrong password or something along those lines. Okay, so here we go. What happens now? Okay, so here are a couple things. Moving forward, based on congregant feedback and best practices and things like that, starting tomorrow morning, we will conclude Zman Kodesh by reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. This has been a theme that has been was repeated by many people, and we are going to have a session that's on the next slide to explain how we can do the Mourner's Kaddish without a minyan. But that'll start tomorrow morning. And so as part of the morning Zman Kodesh and the afternoon one, we'll conclude, instead of using the prayer in lieu of Mourner's Kaddish, by reciting the Mourner's Kaddish that we all know. Number two, we are going to, for people who have wanted to have more of a traditional minyan experience, we're going to introduce something a little bit different, something called Kiyachid prayer service, which requiring praying together as individuals. And so on Shabbat morning, on Sunday evenings, and on Thursday mornings, those sessions will be more like a traditional service, except we're not counting it as if we are a full minyan. And so, for example, there's no repetition of the Amidah. We don't recite Baruch Hu. We recite El Melech Ne'eman before we recite the Shema. We can do Torah reading from a Chumash, but there aren't aliyot. And so it simultaneously tries to maintain a feeling of what it would mean to be daven on your own, a full service or a more traditional service, but also recognize that we're not in a minyan. We're not actually, for 2,000 years, we had a very specific definition of what a minyan was. And so we're trying to honor where we are right now and also recognize that different parts of our community are looking for different things. So if you are a Zman Kodesh as it is devotee, you will still have multiple days where you can do it. And if you're also looking to have a more traditional experience, you can also find that as well. We're going to have 3 sessions where all of us, if you want to take a deeper look at how these changes happen, what are the halachic texts, what are the sources and things like that. I'll be teaching a session next week, Tuesday night, May 19th at 7:30, called Wired to Heaven, Does a Group of 10 Jews on the Internet Count as a Minyan? On Wednesday, May 20th, we'll have a class that Rabbi Zaren's teaching, that Cantor Meir is teaching, honoring our loved ones through observing mitzvot, giving tzedakah, and reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. And then finally, on the week after, on May 26th, Rabbi Zaren will be teaching a class called With the World on Pause, Life Still Goes On, Mourning, Conversion, and More in the Time of the Coronavirus. So here are multiple opportunities for people to learn more about some of the behind-the-scenes texts, and we'll have texts that you can learn from and that we'll visit. Other changes moving forward, there was an interest in having more adult education options. And so after Shavuot on Tuesday nights, Rabbi Zaren and I will be teaching a class called Beyond Dispute, Debates That Shape Jewish Life. This was something that was crafted by JTS. And it's a session that starts with either a 10 to 15-minute trigger film that we can all watch together. And then we'll have a discussion and debate looking at traditional sources. On Wednesday night, Cantor Meir, after following Shavuot, is going to have a class teaching people how to chant Torah, so that when we all get back together in the building for Minyan, we'll be able to have a new army of Torah readers so that we can continue in that tradition. Many people also mentioned they'd like to have a time to continue doing Daf Yomi, and we're going to find a time during the week where we can do that once a week, looking at highlights from the Daf Yomi weekly cycle. We'll continue having Rabbi Confer's Parshat HaShavua class, and just hot off the press, I believe Toby Leibowitz is going to be offering a Hebrew class. Is that correct, Rabbi Zaren?
Starting Monday nights in June, Toby is going to be offering an intermediate level conversational Hebrew class, and you can find more information about that soon.
Excellent. Sorry, Rabbi Zaren, is there also another beginner's class or no? Where did we decide on that? Is that a thing?
We are gathering names of people who would be interested in a beginner's Hebrew class. Our current class has 31 students, and so we have a wait list, and if that wait list grows to a sufficient size, we will happily run a second class.
Awesome. Okay.
Email me if you're interested.
All right. Also, we have some social programs moving forward as well. We're going to offer coffee hours with clergy scattered throughout different days of the week. And basically for these meetings, we're actually looking for small groups, 5 to 7 people, to sign up and have a chance just to check in, talk about how they're feeling, how we're all feeling, and just have a chance to check in. Sometimes when you have an open forum and there's 20 people, it's hard to get a word in, or it's hard to be able to connect. And so we're hoping of creating these small groups of 5 to 7 people so we can really have a chance to talk. We're also interested in organizing something called virtual block parties, where you have a chance to meet with and connect with people who live in your geographic area. And so you might not know all the people who live in your neighborhood, but we're hoping that we can facilitate that and have these block parties. And then finally, we want to try to create common interest groups. And so the idea is to find people who fit into these criteria, and the synagogue facilitate you getting to meet other people. So for example, if you, and there will be a form that you can fill out, but basically if you want to have a conversation with other people who speak foreign languages or people who are born in other places, we can organize a night where we can have something like that. A conversation for networking, poetry slams, social workers, people who are Red Sox fans, people who are Yankees fans, Mets fans, the people who miss baseball, people who don't like baseball. You can have an evening and meet people who have like-minded and similar interests. One of the things these are religious, educational, and social changes moving forward. Finally, I want to address some questions, and I know this is frontal and I'm just throwing a lot of information at you. But the next piece is what happens next. It's something that we've been hearing from lots of people. When will it be safe to restart our in-person services? And this hasn't been decided, and this is something that is constantly changing. But what we do know, and just so that there's a level playing field and everyone knows sort of what we're operating with, when we get together, it requires a couple things. Number one, pikuach nefesh, and taking care of members in our community, both the most vulnerable and even those who aren't in a most vulnerable group, is a top priority. And so we want to make sure that we do so in a way that's safe, using best practices that is suggested by the government and by medical professionals, and also by things that the Rabbinical Assembly and other synagogues are doing. And so part of the recommendations we've been receiving is as follows. If and when government allows people to begin getting together, many organizations are suggesting that shuls wait 2 weeks after that period before we start gathering in-person minyanim. In other words, we will not be the first institution that as soon as we can gather 10 people, we're the first ones opening our doors. All of the advice we've received from multiple organizations says to wait a little bit to see what happens when communities begin and businesses start opening up again. That's number one. I think the first thing, that's number one. Number two, when we start having minyan, we can't have overlap between the different minions. In other words, you can't have somebody who goes on Monday night also going on Tuesday night and also going on Wednesday night. Because the idea is you want to create distinct groups of 10 people who they gather one night, another group gathers another night. And so that way you prevent cross-contamination between the different nights. Which means that if we as a community are interested in gathering once a week, and I think we would starting with 1 minyan per day, probably evening services, because you can get a mincha and a marivin. That means we need to find something like, if you do it 7 times and you want to have a couple of alternates, you're looking at having 72, 80 people signing up to come once a week. And it's a big task to find 80 different people to commit to coming once a night. That also means you need to find service leaders, page callers, and also substitutes for those days in case someone is sick. It would be minyan by reservation first. In other words, you can't just, whoever wants to come on Mondays comes on Mondays and you have 20 people in the building. I think from there we see how that goes and then we expand. Do we add Shabbat morning services next with Torah reading? Because that brings with it a whole list of complications of aliyot, of Torah readers and things like that. And then I think the third stage would be to add weekday morning services. All of this we would do in conjunction with our Zman Kodesh sessions. So we will still have morning and evening opportunities. As you can see, if we're waiting a couple of weeks from when the governor says you can start, it probably won't happen during phase 1 and might not even happen during phase 2. We need to create these distinct groupings of 10 people. And this obviously assumes we're not really sharing sidurim. Everyone is wearing masks. We're practicing social distancing. Ideally, we would pray outside instead of inside the main sanctuary. And if it's raining, we can pray inside the main sanctuary. I want to acknowledge and thank Paul and also John Wright, who has been, they've been working together, and Steve O'Brien to improve the audio and video capabilities, not just in the main sanctuary, but throughout the entire building. And so whenever we do get back together, obviously streaming will be a major component of it, because even if some of us can be together in the building, many of us will not be able to. And one thing we've learned is for many people how the shul is their social and educational home. And we want to make sure that we can keep providing that. So I think you've already seen an improvement in the audio and video of Shabbat morning services, and you're going to continue to see more integration of audio and video and virtual experiences as we move forward through this. Regarding the high holy days, it's still up in the air in terms of we don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but we're definitely going to have them. There will be high holidays at Temple Emanu-El. What they look like is we're still trying to figure that out. But I think this is an opportunity for our synagogue to shine. And I'd love to create something like the Tishrei Task Force. Realistically, creating multiple experiences that are meaningful and transformative for our entire congregation is something that the clergy and the staff can't do by ourselves. And so after Shavuot, we hope to start forming opportunities for people to come together, to share ideas, to collaborate, to connect, and to create multiple offerings so people can feel that this year's high holidays will be a transformative experience. After Pesach, I know that for many people, they said this year's Pesach was so different and this, and it was hard. But I heard while that was all true, they were also able to do all kinds of new things this year. And so I am hopeful and excited to see what we as a community can do together to make this year's high holiday experience meaningful and relevant, and something that hopefully none of us will forget and remember for all of the right reasons. So these are trying to allay, so that's that. Finally, the question is, what happens now? So we want to move forward with these policies and see how they play out, get feedback, and check in again in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we're going to know different things from the government. We're going to know different things from medical professionals, and we'll have a different idea. But the idea is to move forward always in collaboration, always getting feedback, and always understanding that for the clergy and for the staff, these are conversations juggling different values. And I hope you hear and see how responsive the clergy has been to some of the recommendations and requests as we figure out as a community how to move forward with all of this. So, final takeaways. Oh, I made a lot of slides. Look at this. Final takeaways. We're a large and growing community with different needs and interests. We can't always get exactly what you want, but we can, through compromise and shared values, we can hopefully find ways of all of us coming together. Number 2, feedback is critical. You can draw a straight line from the data we've received to specific actions that we've taken. And the clergy asks for direct, open, and honest communication. When people say things like, lots of people have said X, Rabbi, I like to, sometimes I'll respond and say, like, no one said it to me, right? And so if you'd like to have a conversation about what we do in the synagogue or, and how do we make meaningful religious experiences, I can talk about that all day. Number 3, this is hard, right? There are days, I'm sure, where I say it. I'm sure you say it too, where you just look up from your cup of coffee or your cup of juice and you're saying, this is hard. I miss the way things used to be. I miss seeing my friends. I miss being able to go to the grocery store whenever I want. I miss going out to restaurants. And like, I just want so badly someone to make me a meal that I don't have to cook myself, right? And these are things that we all feel. And that's why if you need help or you ever want to chat, please know the clergy is available. I want to make really explicit that there have been people who have emailed the clergy and say, you know what, I haven't seen person X or Y in a while, or I haven't heard from them. Why don't you reach out? And the truth is, those phone calls, we make them, and those people are always appreciative of it. And so I encourage you to always reach out to us. Also needs change. What we've been doing for the past 6 weeks, any changes we make any changes we make isn't because we were wrong, or it wasn't because we were wrong. I think because we iterate and move forward. Where we are as a community today is different from where we were on March 14th. And we constantly do different needs assessments. different ideas for how to move forward. I remember around Pesach, people said, Rabbi, can we just do Pesach Sheni? A month after the original Pesach, you get to celebrate a second Pesach. Because I think deep down, all of us thought or hoped all of this would be past us by this time. And the truth is, we're realizing more and more that it's not past us, and it's going to be here for a little bit longer, for a while longer. And so I think it's a sign of strength and resilience to be able to evaluate what we've done and then to figure out what we're going to do moving forward to keep being resilient and find our inner strength. We'll talk about, we've learned a lot and we'll continue to learn about the importance of virtual connections, how wonderful it is to see each other, but also how important it is to see each other in person. And how we can try to have 200 people on a Skype chat or on a Zoom call, but it's very different than having 200 people in a room together and hearing the noise and feeling that energy. It's different. And I think I simultaneously want to hold on to the awareness that this is different and also hold on to the familiar so it can give me strength during this difficult time. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Stand by, please. There it is. No, there it is. There we go. And the time is 8:10. And let's see what happens. If we can look at the chat. One question, if people have questions, what I'd like to do is if you can you can send them to me privately if you don't mind, and I can look through them. That way we can sort of have like a structure to them. If you can email, just put a little message in the chat box if you have like a specific question you want me to answer, and we'll take it from there. And I invite Cantor Mayer or Rabbi Zarin, if you want to chime into any of these questions, please let me know. All right, one question. Will the time be at 5:45 or later to accommodate people who are working but still want to be a part of Minyan? So this is a big question, and this is a time for all of us to figure out how do we best serve our community. We know that the recommendations from the government, the first steps of it are going to say things like we highly recommend people 65 or 70 or older not go into public settings. And there is a question about what is the responsibility of a shul in those situations. And if we know 5:45 is a challenging time or is an obstacle to forming a minyan, and a later minyan will help us form that in-person minyan, I think that's something that we can explore and something that we can talk about. I think one thing that this coronavirus situation has done is it's given us an opportunity to think creatively and broadly about how do we not only respond to our needs right now, but what are the long-term challenges down the road as well. Let's see other comments. More creative art classes, let's do it. For Shabbat morning service, moving forward, starting this weekend, the Shabbat morning service is going to have a little bit more davening. We're still trying to figure out exactly what it is, and we'll play with it. Our hunch, correct me if I'm wrong, Cantor Mayer and Rabbi Zarin, I think it's going to be Birchot HaShachar and Pesukei de Zimra, and we'll do Shachrit, we'll do a little Torah reading, and there'll be sort of like a teaching experience. And then we'll invite people to daven Musaf by themselves because we can't have repetitions of the Amidot. And I think that's more what Shabbat morning services are going to feel like. In terms of in-person Shabbat morning services, I think we're going to have some conversations about how do we decide who goes which day and things like that. But those are conversations that we need to have. I'm looking to see if people have posted any other comments. Let's see here. Well, if you're going to compliment me, you should make it public. That's what you should definitely do. Okay. We'll give it another minute or so to see if anybody has a specific comment or question. Give me 1 second. Oh, here we go. Somebody suggested we could have reserved seating for Zoom chats. That's very funny. I like that. Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Officially speaking, I'm going to adjourn our meeting this evening. If you want to, it's always fun. If you guys want to wave at each other, it's always a nice way to end. I think tomorrow, if you have any questions or ideas that you have, I think we'll send out an email. So One of the challenges is if you just email directly, what ends up happening is like sometimes an email can get lost or you don't know who got it or didn't. So we'll probably create a Google form where you can submit questions or concerns or comments so they all get put into one central place. And that allows us to respond to all of the questions and issues. And we'll take it from there. All right, I'm gonna unmute everyone so people can say goodbye. And if you wanna head out, class is officially over. But if you wanna stick around and chat for a few minutes, so stick around. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Night, everyone.
Rabbi.
Night.
Thank you.
Night.
Ciao.
Bye.
Nice to see everybody.
Night.
Good night. Good night.